From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made in the town of Alabama in Genesee County. That town is home to what has become a controversial tech hub. It's called the Western New York Science, Technology, and Advanced Manufacturing Park. It's known as STAMP. The tech park has been on the radar of economic development officials for decades, literally for decades, since it has the potential to attract manufacturing and other industries to Western New York. In 2021, it welcomed its first tenant, a hydropower firm, but due to environmental concerns, to financial and legal troubles, the project has been on hiatus there, and that site largely remains empty. Those looking to develop the site asked, what could the hub be home to next? And that's where the latest controversy comes in. After reviewing 3 proposals for data centers, a team recommended that the Genesee County Economic Development officials advance a plan from Stream US. If the Dallas-based company's plan is approved, it could build the region's largest data center at the STAMP site. Now, supporters say it would benefit the local community by creating more than 100 good-paying jobs. But there's been some pushback. Environmental activists have expressed concerns about possible harms to the surrounding land and nearby wildlife refuges. And at a public hearing, other community members said they were concerned about how much power is going to be required at this data center site. And representatives from the Tonawanda Seneca Nation were vocal about what they see as a threat of the project encroaching on the nearby reservation. And just 2 days ago, the Tonawanda Seneca Nation and the Sierra Club filed suit to stop the project from moving forward. WXXI's Gino Finelli has been covering this story for months. It may sound wonky at times, but it raises questions that touch on broader themes. How can we balance economic development with environmental protections? What types of projects make sense for different parts of our region? How should community feedback factor in to how decisions are being made? This hour, Gino is joining me in studio talking about what he has learned and what we should know about the story of this project over the years, and also how it could impact the region. And we also are going to hear from members of the Tonawanda Seneca Nation about why they oppose the project. I'd like to welcome our guest, Gino Finelli, investigations and City Hall reporter for WXXI News, who could be hosting this program, but I'll do that, and you just hang out here.
That's fine with me.
Okay. Hey, thank you for being here, as always, Gino.
Thank you.
Chris Abrams is a member of the Beaver Clan and an office administrator for the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. Chris, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Grandel Bird Logan is with us from the Snipe Clan, a media spokesperson for the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. Grandel, thank you for being with us as well.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I want to make a note to the audience as well. We did reach out to representatives from the Genesee County Economic Development Center, that's GCEDC, but they did not respond to multiple invitations to join this conversation. It's a bummer. I really do want to understand what is going on at the site, how people envision the site, how those who kind of have some of the power envision what happens next at this site, what money is being spent or incentivized to make this site happen. So, you're not going to get every angle of that, but unfortunately, Gino, that's kind of nothing new on this story, is it?
No, I've been writing about this for about 2 years, and I still have not had an actual conversation with GCEDC. I mean, I've talked to some of the people there that have mostly no commented or say we can't comment on this because of litigation or whatever reason. But most of the time, it's just you reach out and try to have a conversation and dead air.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that I should point out to the audience so you get a little sense for how we do things here. Number one, we always want to bring multiple perspectives together in a civil way that addresses issues as forthrightly as possible. And sometimes even when it's uncomfortable. But that's valuable. That's really important. What we cannot do is have one side say, well, I'm not talking to you, so therefore you can't have a conversation on the show about it. That's how you chill speech. That's how you shut down speech. And so that's also not fair. And this is an important story for the region. So we're going to do our best to cover it with what we got today. I will also say, I mean, I don't know all that much about GCDC and Gino, you've had much more experience trying to get in touch with them. But I always think transparency is better. And maybe that's just the naive part of me, Gino. Maybe that's the journalist in me. And I understand why sometimes people who work in economic development or government, et cetera, don't feel like they can talk or don't feel like they can make public statements. But I always think it's better when you do. I think it's better to communicate transparently.
Silence leaves a lot of room for people to fill in what you meant to say. And I think this is a great example of that. It's the more they refuse to actually talk about the issue, the more that the issues that come up, the environmental concerns, the sovereignty of the Seneca Nation's concerns, if they're not going to say anything to address them, you can assume that everything that people are criticizing them and saying is correct. That's what people tend to do. So
Fair or not,
I think,
right?
Yeah, fair or not, but that's how people work.
So let's go back a little bit of history before we understand why some of our guests are concerned about this project. And this is a site. First of all, where is this? I mean, this goes back years now, Gino. Take us kind of back to the beginning.
Yeah, okay. So this is quite a road. So the stamp earnestly started in 2009 to actually, it's in the town of Alabama. It's a little bit northwest of Batavia. It's kind of in an area that's mostly, it borders the Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge, the John Way Wildlife Management Area, the Tonawanda Wildlife Management Area, these mostly wetland ecosystems that this kind of big open 1,250 acre plot is sitting in the middle of. At the time that it was proposed, the idea was that it would be a place that could attract big companies, mostly in tech and science and manufacturing, as the name implies, to set up shop and hire people pulling from both the Rochester and the Buffalo markets, given that it sits kind of like right in the middle of it. Nothing happened for well over a decade until it got its first actual tenant in 2021. That would be Plug Power, which is a hydrogen power cell storage company. They started building stuff out. You can see if you go there now, there's these big white orb things that kind of sit there. I'm assuming they use for hydrogen storage. I'm not a scientist, so I have no idea what they actually are, but that's what I assume they're used for. So they started building out some of their infrastructure, some of their power lines, and some of their things like that. And then you get into the the Stamp Sewage Works, which was a pipeline about 9 miles that was going to run into Oak Orchard Creek, heading north into the town of Shelby, where it would flow northward out there through the town of Medina. That became a huge controversy due to the fact that it would be running through the Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge, essentially. And that would carry about 6 million gallons of water per day, effluent from the site that would flow off through there. There was several pieces of litigation that were filed in regards to that. One from Orleans County, where the town of Shelby and Medina are, against Genesee County. It was honestly like an argument of sovereignty of counties that they were going to be building there without asking permission to do so. So really interesting lawsuit that I wrote about at the time as part of all of this. And so, yeah, very controversial. November 2023, the DEC actually cited them for dumping their drilling fluid into the wetland itself, which was a violation of state environmental laws. This led to, in 2024, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service actually halted that part of the project. And that kind of came at a serendipitous time for them a little bit, because Plug Power's financials were basically insolvent. So they're done. They keep saying the project is on pause, but there is no clear path forward at all for that to actually happen. I do want to touch a note on how much tax incentives go into this. The project that Plug Power was planning on doing was $268.5 million in tax incentives it was going to be to build on the site. There is another company that is a tenant there, Edwards Vacuum. They manufacture vacuum pumps. They started construction last year, and they're still not open, but they're in the process of doing that right now.
And they might be actually solvent.
They might be. For now, we'll see how the vacuum market holds up over the next few years. So all that leads to earlier this year, where they started looking at, what else can we attract here? And data centers, which are basically big, giant warehouses that hold a lot of computer servers. And they take an enormous amount of power. They use an enormous amount of water. And the space inside of them is usually rented out to different tenants to use the server space in there. They're largely, the reason this has become a cottage industry that's really, really big money, we're talking about like a $6.5 billion project for the one that's proposed to the site, is for generative AI, artificial intelligence. It's big computers that they need for it. Again, not a scientist, but I do know that they need a lot of power and they need a lot of computers to do it. So the idea for that was to go into that space, and that's what we can attract right now. These would be one of the biggest ones in the region. by quite a large margin too. We don't really have anything of this scale. They call them hyperscale data centers. There's 3 project proposals put on the table. Fascinating piece of all of this too. 2 of them, you try to track down who actually owns them or who is involved in it. It's just a web of LLCs and procurement officers that just you can't actually find anyone who's behind them.
Kind of by design, I think.
By design. The 2 other proposals, which I'm blanking on what the actual project names were for them, but I just recall going down this web for days of trying to find out who can I even talk to about these things. They don't exist. It's just like a network of just random people that have money and are willing to invest in it. So the one that is been proposed to actually go forward is from Stream US. They're based in Dallas. They are a little bit less shrouded in shadow than the other ones. It's also huge, 900,000 square feet, using 250 megawatts of power, which is just astronomical amounts of power usage. It's enough to power a small town. Actually a pretty decent sized town. And $6.3 billion in the cost of actual construction there, $417.6 million in sales and mortgage tax exemptions as incentive to build there for 122 full-time jobs is what is proposed for that site. So the concerns that were around for things like Plug Power and leading up to this litigation itself are pretty much the same, different but the same for what's being proposed in the data center. That when they did their original environmental survey and tried to determine, what we're going to do here, whether we conform with all environmental laws, data centers didn't even really exist in the way they do now back then. So that seems like a large focus of the litigation now is that there's been this environmental survey that's been done. This is what you said you're going to do, and now you're just kind of shoehorning in this other thing. For as far as I can tell, no other reason besides that's the only thing you can get to go there. That's the only thing that people actually are going to be willing to build there. So it went from this really big picture idea of having a big manufacturing park where companies would set up and create tons of jobs and there'd be tax incentives for them to do it, and it would make for an economic boon in Genesee County, to where we're at now, where we're going to be building out these things that are kind of the only thing we can build there, and can, in quotation marks, whether or not the environmental concerns are going to be determined is, up for the courts, but the only thing that is willing to build there, and for really comparatively a meager amount of jobs for a massive amount of tax incentives. And I think that's where we land right now.
The company's from Dallas?
Their U.S. headquarters is in Dallas.
Yeah.
I believe there's some foreign interest involved in there too as well.
So if you're listening in Dallas, if you're listening in Genesee County, if you're listening in Albany, and you're thinking, well, that's not the full story, guess what? Talk to people. Actually be forthcoming. Gino is piecing this together after being stonewalled time after time after time.
I would add, this is an important note in all of this, is I've been, again, covering this for 2 years, and I've done many stories on it, and I have yet to meet a person who is fully supportive of the project, who has stake in the project, and also is willing to talk to me. I have not met that person yet. And
you got to fly to Dallas, my friend.
I guess so, but if you can track down the name of a CEO, please let me know.
Okay, so a couple other things before we turn to the guests across the table here. Gino's point about the megawattage here. For those of us who don't work in tech, 250 megawatts, according to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, 1 megawatt can power between 400 and 900 homes in a year. What that means is, at minimum, this site would have the megawattage to power the entire city of Rochester and have power left over.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot. And just for, another, I think, piece of the story that is developing, to Gino's point that I know there's a lot of talk about environmental review and a lot of talk about have environmental reviews slowed down development, housing, rail in California, et cetera, et cetera. Those are good and important questions. In this case, an environmental review that may be years old is maybe not telling you the full story, because we're now at a time, look at Seneca Lake with crypto. Look at the Greenwich site down on Seneca Lake of what was for years, it was one kind of a plant, and all of a sudden it becomes a computing center for Bitcoin mining. And the amount of computing power needed to mine for Bitcoins is remarkable. Again, not an expert here, but my understanding of Bitcoin is there's 21 million total Bitcoins, something like that. It's a finite number. Every time somebody mines a new Bitcoin, the next Bitcoin becomes a more complicated mathematical set of problems to solve that require huge amounts of computing power, and it gets more and more complicated to mine the remaining Bitcoins. I know the head spins here, but that's when we have to know how much computing power. What's the water cost? What's the environmental issue? How does it affect nearby or existing water, whether you're on Seneca Lake or whether you're near streams, etc.? These are all important questions, aren't they?
Yeah, and what is the old tech ethos of move fast and break things? Do we want to do that on our fragile ecosystems and figure out what the problems are long after these things might not even be relevant anymore in 10 years? We have to think about that as a real thing. And
they might be replacing us in 10 years. Come on, Gina.
More than
Generative
likely.
AI, man. But you also mentioned $268.5 million in tax incentives.
That was for Plug Power. For the data center, it's $417.6 million.
So hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yes.
And so this is where my frustration, when you can't get an answer from an economic development council or people who work in, I am sure there are things that I am not understanding. I don't have all the answers. I don't know why certain decisions are being made. It would be valuable to know how you see, and I say the general you, if you work in government, if you work in economic development, whatever it is, it'd be valuable to see, okay, this is why this incentive makes sense here, because it's going to create X amount of jobs. We think this will last well into the future. We think this will create not just these jobs, but will attract other companies to the site. We think we can grow Stamp. We think we can have 1,000 jobs, 2,000, 5, whatever it is. And we've penciled out the math, and this is the right kind of investment. I mean, I would love to know that. It's easy to look at those numbers and be cynical, but I would love to know the justification, and maybe there is one. I just don't have the people in the room to help me understand it.
Yeah, I mean, for the data centers, if you want to look at it in the perspective of full-time jobs to the amount of tax exemptions that they're given, it's $3.4 million in tax exemptions per full-time job projected, which is a lot of tax exemptions. And it's not even just the tax exemptions itself. I mean, the Stamp project got $33 million from the Buffalo Billion in 2014, $56 million from the state in 2022. This is our money. And we're talking astronomical amounts of it for a very large project. And if you ask anyone a question about it, it's just no comment. And as a journalist, I find that appalling. And it's frustrating that we have to be at a point where we're even having this conversation and saying, hey, we reached out to them and they wouldn't talk, when we're talking about this large scale of a project.
Yeah, and public money. You're right. You're right. And public money. And the implication, tell me if I'm wrong here, the implication is we'll tell you when things are done. We'll tell you when it's done and dusted as opposed to in process.
Yeah, if you want to believe that.
Right. But we'll talk publicly once all the decisions have been made and everything has been finalized, as opposed to we will bring the public into the process and be transparent.
We'll see about that. But, the thing to me is you have to be transparent, not at the end of the process when things are already set and done.
That's kind of what I mean, right?
Yeah, it has to be done. You have to be transparent when the process is happening.
My point is that's not transparency.
No, transparency after the fact is the opposite of transparency. That's right. It's, it's waiting for something bad to happen and then saying, well, who could have seen this coming?
Exactly. And I've talked to people in all kinds of different levels of government, federal government, state, economic development over years. And there are times when they're like, boy, the journalists just have no idea what's actually going on here. And my response is always, then tell them. Then talk to people. Then talk to the public.
I mean, they love when we get it wrong. It's like one of their favorite
just talk
things.
About it.
I'm sure there's someone out there from GCEDC or affiliated with them listening to this right now and just waiting to tear down everything I just said. And to them, I would say, you got my number.
Exactly.
Just call me.
Exactly. Let's do this. All right, let me turn to Grandel Bird Logan and Chris Abrams, who are joining us this hour from the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. Grandel is a media spokesperson, and Chris is an office administrator for the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. And I'll start with you, Grandel. I'll ask both of you. In general, Why don't you tell our audience how you see this project, where it's situated, if you want to tell us about the land and the concerns that you have, and then we'll kind of go into a little bit more specific. But I'll give you kind of the floor. Go ahead.
Sure. So I guess to begin, I'd like to point out a specific part of our territory there in Tonawanda known as the Big Woods. And so from the Big Woods, you can actually see those globes that Gino was talking about previously that are sitting vacant over in the old Plug Power site. So it's not far. It's not far when you look at maps from between Stamp and the Tonawanda Seneca Reservation. It's not very far at all. This new data center is going to be, if it's built, only about a half mile away from the territory. And so this area known as the Big Woods, it's just a very delicate and pristine ecosystem. Our people still exist off of the environment. We still make use of the earth. We still have folks who hunt, get meat for their families, who gather medicines, plant medicines for their families and still rely upon that. I know me, for instance, my dad growing up, he would give us medicines if we were sick, be it in the winter, things he had gathered from the spring and summer before, and so on. And the Big Woods, without being too specific, is one of the places that he would go and look for these things. And so the concern is not even talking about any potential things happening, things going wrong at the site, is with a data center, the noise that's needed, the water that's needed, the storing of 60,000 gallons of diesel fuel to use for their generators there, should there be any power outages, the fumes from that, all of these factors that just pile up over time. The fear is that that's going to have a negative impact on the ecosystem there in the Big Woods, because these things radiate. We hear about how people who live nearby data centers experience headaches, sleeplessness, all kinds of issues in their work life because of the constant noise. And the one thing with the construction that's been going on up to this point is that they stop at a certain time. Those people have to go home too. But with a data center, it's going to be pretty well 24/7. And so the concern is that there will be light and noise pollution, and the concern of what that's going to do to these animals in the area. The ecosystem has done a really good job over the hundreds of thousands of years of making a system for itself to propagate itself, right? So birds will eat berries, help spread seeds. You have small pollinators, insects and things that hang around in the area to help, again, propagate plants. And animals need to eat these plants. You know, it's a very intensely intricate cycle that when you bring something as big as a data center in, it's going to be interrupted. And as Indigenous people, as Haudenosaunee people, and as Tonawanda Seneca people, we heavily rely on and are grateful for our environment. So listeners might have heard before from previous speakers on these talks on connections about this speech known as the Oindongai Wadihko, or the Thanksgiving address, or the Ganonyo, you'll hear it called. And so this basically takes us through all these different facets of our planet. And some of them spiritual, some of them more physical. But these are all things that we rely upon, even if we don't directly rely upon them today. I mean, not everybody has their own gardens at home. Not everybody plants for their own family. But you rely on food coming from someplace else that somebody has grown. So we do still rely upon our environment. So these things all inform our stewardship over our environment. And so with this data center being the most recent issue, these are some of the things that we're most worried about. You know, previously with Plug, there was those worries of, say, like acute explosive risks, fires, things like that, and the question of whether or not EMS can really even respond to that in the town of Alabama. And so that's kind of where I was brought into this whole issue, was in 2021 with Plug, when they were starting to really find themselves there at the Stamp site. And so now I find myself as a media person on this litigation. And I think that's about all I have at this moment on that.
Chris?
Yes, so just overall, the Stamp site is a threat to us. It's a threat to our way of life, which is part of what Randall just spoke about the Big Woods and what it provides to us as a people. But overall, it's the whole territory. We have these, medicines throughout. We have the animals throughout. It's not just Big Woods, but it's just the part of the woods that's right adjacent to the Stamp site. We're just right there. Even though we have a buffer And in the beginning, we were only offered a buffer of 100 feet. We asked, we want 400 feet. So we said that, but any amount of, feet of the buffer doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to the harms that could come to the territory. Right now, anything that happens there, any kind of disaster that may be affecting the groundwater, surface water, everything drains towards the territory. So right off the bat, we will be affected by any kind of environmental disaster or, some kind of, event that may happen there to cause leakage of or fluids or whatever from the companies. And so this is a fear of what may happen to us as we all depend on well water. And what Bird alluded to was to the hunting. Right now, even with just the construction that's happening there, it's going to chase away the deer, which our people depend upon, and not just from Tonawanda Seneca Nation territory, but also from other Haudenosaunee territories come to Tonawanda to hunt. We get many people during the season to hunt. So it's not just for us, but they're willing to share what we have on our land, and that's part of it. The medicines as well as the deer and any other animals that they may hunt. So, this is a fear for the data centers for sure. They have 24/7 of very, I understand to be jet engine sounds from the data centers, and plus from whatever they call the chillers that will help cool off their equipment. That's what's going to cause a lot of noise as well. So this is going to really affect our animal population. And we don't know whether it will reduce just the number that may be in the big woods or completely just take it away. We don't know. But I think that would be one of the first impacts from invisible impacts from the data centers when we are not able to hunt deer in that area.
Let me ask Chris and Bird about, maybe one of the things that if there were supporters of this project or this site or this idea on this program, they may say, look, yeah, it's 122 jobs here, but hopefully it's another 250 with another company, another 250 with another, and we're going to grow. And the people who will be employed will include people from the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. I mean, it could be people from all parts of the area. It could be people from your walks of life who are going to have a chance to be employed. Does that move you at all, Chris?
Well, we're not going to push it. We're not going to push them, push the jobs. There will be an individual choice, if they want to go there. But I hope that they will not. But, it's not our job for us to seek jobs for people.
Okay.
But, like I said, it's nothing that we're going to be pushing for.
What do you think, Bird?
The thing that we have to make sure we tell folks is we're not opposed to folks bringing more jobs. That's the thing. But when things make sense, then that's understandable. They're talking about building a mega industrial site, and they're building a mega industrial site between our territory. You have the Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge, you have Tonawanda WMA, you have John White. It just doesn't make sense. If something happens, these delicate areas are going to be affected. And it just makes no sense. And so we have times where we do have some debate with folks, and that's what we have to remind them is we're not against, jobs. We're not against green energy, anything like that. It's just at what cost? You're asking our people to potentially pay that price with our culture, our ways of being. That's too high of a cost. If we lose who we are, then we're not willing to pay that price for anything, any economic growth.
Gino, I want to read something that the AP reported in April that maybe dovetails with some of what you said about how relevant will these kind of jobs be. This is regarding Microsoft, but let me just read from the AP's reporting 3 months ago. Quote, Microsoft said it is slowing or pausing some of its data center construction, including a $1 billion project in Ohio, the latest sign that the demand for artificial intelligence technology that drove a massive infrastructure expansion might not need quite as many powerful computers as expected. The tech giant confirmed this week that it is halting early-stage projects on rural land that it owns in central Ohio's Licking County, outside of Columbus, and will reserve 2 of the 3 sites for farmland. A company leader said, "Any significant new endeavor at this size and scale requires agility and refinement as we learn and grow with our customers. What this means is that we are slowing or pausing some early-stage projects." Microsoft did not say what other projects it has slowed outside of Ohio, but in late December last year, it revealed it was pausing the later phases of a large data center project in Wisconsin as well. End quote. What do you make of that?
I mean, doesn't it just make sense that, we have this kind of novel technology that I think we're still figuring out how to even use it. And then you're talking about these massive multi-billion-dollar projects that are underway just, on speculation. And it is speculation, just as crypto mining is speculation. And we've already seen it crash before. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that something that seems like this big and this new of an industry is going to end up retracting real hard.
Yeah, and so maybe the way I would phrase questions to this empty chair here, which represents, I'm doing like the Clint Eastwood thing way back in the day.
Wow.
This represents, GCEDC. But I would say on the optimistic side, this data center comes in and it's cranking and it is full capacity and it is growing and it attracts other jobs. However, we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks to try to get these companies in here. Is that the right investment? And if they are cranking away the way that you would like, you've got the Tonawanda Seneca Nation, you've got the Sierra Club, you've got others saying, what is the cost environmentally? What is happening, and what are the obligations environmentally? Are we actually being good stewards there? On the downside, we're investing all this money at this site, making all these promises. And you look, I could read another story about Amazon from Reuters in April, pausing data centers for its cloud division as well, saying, well, we might have overestimated what we need. So are you sure that this is the right kind of an anchor here? Even if you set aside the environment, so these are the things that I would love to hear answers on. I guess.
Me too.
Yeah, you probably would too. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. Well, the chair said nothing. We have to take our only break of the hour, and we're going to come back. We've got feedback from listeners, and I want to talk to our guests from the Tonawanda Seneca Nation as well about some of the larger pictures, how this fits into what has been a question in this country for centuries now about whether land and treaties are respected. So we'll take that short break. We'll come right back, and we'll welcome your feedback on Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Let me read one more story that came from the Luxembourg Times in August of last year. So less than a year old, and this is about Alphabet, which is Google's company. Alphabet Inc.'s Google has been refused permission to build a data center just outside Dublin for failing to meet some of Ireland's sustainability requirements. The tech giant's plan to develop a 72,400 square meter data storage facility was rejected by the South Dublin County Council. The council wrote that Google had not provided enough detail on how the proposal will impact the power supply once operational in 2027. Electricity grid constraints are one of Ireland's biggest infrastructure challenges, in part exacerbated by the growth of power-hungry data centers that enable cloud services and artificial intelligence. These facilities, drawn to Ireland because of its moderate climate and role as a regional business hub, are forecast to consume a third of the country's energy by 2026. Dublin is home to Google's European headquarters and 2 operational data centers. Google has previously announced a goal to run its data centers on carbon-free energy by 2030. But that's just a picture to me of 2 things there, Gino. In the world of crypto and in the world of AI, even if they have to slow certain projects, it is going to be a huge energy outlay. And you've got some places like Dublin's County Council saying, not good enough. Like, this is not sustainable, and we're not doing it. It's interesting to see in different places where they're drawing the line on whether it's crypto, AI, data centers, et cetera.
I think, to me, sustainability as far as the long-term trajectory here, it's so obviously not going to be sustainable in the long term, just given the way the technology is developing. We don't know yet what the capacity is going to be. We don't know what right now AI is essentially the Wild West. We don't know what regulations will be put on it. This is all I'm thinking of, like, if you were opening up a factory and you made toothpicks. Well, you know the market for toothpicks. You know it's not going away because people still have teeth and they still need to pick them. And you know how big it's going to have to be to produce what you need for a profit. For these data centers, you're looking for tenants that, for what's on the stamp, who they're going to be, we have no idea. We don't know what the long-term demand is going to be. We don't know what the long-term usage is going to be. We don't know what the long-term regulations are going to be. We don't know what the long-term profitability is going to be. So how could it be sustainable is a question that I would also oppose to the empty chair.
Yeah, and certainly on AI, I would say there's a really legitimate concern that the future of AI in the next 2 to a million years, let's think long term and let's think, but I mean, it's going to happen fast. It's going to concentrate more wealth in the hands of a few companies, the companies that run these big AI operations. And it could cost a lot of jobs. And here's Dallas emailing the program saying, I know what other projects they're slowing, the ones where they hire actual humans.
That is true, right?
Right.
I mean, it's a question, too, of that 122 people, are they even going to be on site? Like, are they,
I don't know. Yeah, right. Are they local? I don't know.
no idea.
No idea. So a couple other emails here. Alex writes to say, what's that old Santayana quote? That those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. Launching a site to attract semiconductor plants in 2009 is textbook premature planning. Microsoft, Amazon, and Alphabet are already pausing their own hyperscale data center plans. Do we need to make the same mistake twice? That is from Alex. Yeah, I mean, like that's again, Alex. What I want to say is, as humbly as I can, is maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there is other information that would convince you, Alex, that this is a good way to invest money in a good project. But the people who are behind it are not here, and they're not really talking publicly very much. So I can't answer that. Does it look like a similar mistake? I can understand why you would feel that way, but I don't know. Patrick writes to say, just a couple of thoughts here. Let's say a data center did go in there. Fill in the rest of the place with solar panels and offset a megawattage of force, and then they can sell production back to the grid. And how tainted could water that cools data centers actually become? It's just water that runs through pipes and exits, right? He says, I understand that being directly on a Finger Lake is different, and that there are coal plants on both Cayuga and Seneca. There's an old coal plant about 40 minutes north of Ithaca on Route 90. I think I'm more interested in AI computing power than Bitcoin computing power. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I can understand slightly different there. And I don't know the science of, what happens when water cools and flows through the pipes. I mean, this is way outside. Mm-hmm. I don't know, man. I don't know, Patrick. I don't want to downplay what they mean. Anything you want to add there, Bert?
As far as I understand, I had, to my understanding, again, also not an expert there, Alex, but what I had heard about this is that they're not really going to be using water particularly for cooling these devices. That's why they have those chillers there on top. And that's going to take up a lot of the, I guess, cooling responsibilities for these. And that's also going to be a major noise producer because these will have to run pretty well constantly to keep these devices cooling for this generative AI.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, anything you want to add there, Gino? Again, this is where us not being scientists, this is a hard one.
No.
Wise.
I'm good. Yeah.
Wise not touching that one. Melissa writes to say, one of the project companies wanted to build in Pennsylvania near just one state park and was refused. Now they are proposing building next to 3 or 4 important parks. Who said yes? Wouldn't it make great sense to give the money for the tax breaks directly to the local residents? What would the locals do with it? That's Melissa. Who said yes, she asked.
Yeah, I remember a few months ago there was a public hearing on the 3 data center projects that me and my Max Schulte, our photographer, went out to, and man, there was just hours of people speaking in opposition, and I don't think there was one that was like actually vouching for the validity of these specific projects. And Evan, I'm kind of like you in all this. I'm like, maybe there is something I'm missing, and I would like to know what that is, but I just am not seeing it. I just, it's a hard thing for me to, understand.
Yeah, and it's easy, as you say, for the public to start filling in the blanks when the powerful people in charge aren't talking and aren't answering those questions. It's easy for people to assume, look, they're making some pretty strong allegations here, and if you won't even stand up and refute them, what am I supposed to conclude? I can understand that psychology.
I mean, me coming on here, I was planning on being the most neutral voice that I can, and I am just listing facts.
Yep.
Everything I have here is verifiable. It's in public record, and I'm sure I come off as a zealot against this project just because I'm listing off the facts of the project. And that is a confounding thing for me when we're talking about this.
Well, so let me ask Grandel Bird Logan and Chris Abrams from the Tonawanda Seneca Nation about maybe a bigger picture question, which is, when there are tribes, when there are nations who are feeling like a pipeline project, a data center project, some kind of use of land is either not only offensive or threatening, but even in violation of treaties and rights. This country has seen a lot of broken agreements. I don't necessarily just want to loop this into exactly the same thing, but I want to start by asking Bird, how do you see this country's respect or lack thereof for tribal lands, for treaties, for rights? What do you think?
I think that indigenous treaty rights and environmental rights oftentimes go hand in hand. It's kind of hard to have this conversation about environmentalism, about what's happening at Stamp, without bringing up treaties. The Tonawanda Seneca Nation is a federally recognized nation. We are a part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. For those who don't know what that is, the Six Nations Confederacy. You'll hear it referred to as Iroquois Confederacy. And we also have treaties with the federal government, even ranging back to the Canandaigua Treaty of 1794, which guaranteed Seneca people free use and enjoyment of our lands pretty much until, and that's where that phrase comes from, until as long as the rivers flow, as long as the grass is green, as long as the sun shines, and so on. And I don't see how this really helps us continue to have free use and enjoyment of our lands. We're here telling them that the noise, the light, the industrial activity here at Stamp is going to negatively impact our people. It's almost a given. You have more people coming to an area, you have more activity in an area, the environment's going to pull back. The environment's going to react. I mean, we were all there in COVID pandemic, seeing animals pretty much taking up urban environments with less people out, less cars in the road, less business happening. People and our industrial activities take up a lot of space. And it's going to just push these animals away, leading to that hindrance upon our free use and enjoyment. And so I want to say it was last year we had gone to the Canandaigua Treaty commemoration there in the city of Canandaigua. And I had spoken briefly about our struggles with Stamp and why I believe it's a treaty issue. And it's said right in the United States Constitution that all treaties, it never specifies, that all treaties are the supreme law of the land. And so that would include Canandaigua Treaty, that would include any treaty with a native nation included. In my opinion, that just makes sense with the language, with everything that they've written back then and how they had formed everything. All treaties are supreme law of the land. And so that includes the Canandaigua Treaty, and that includes our people having free use and enjoyment of our lands. And at that same talk, there was a leader from Onondaga Nation out in Syracuse who had stood up, and he had spoken briefly about treaties and basically treaty responsibilities. And he had told the crowd, raise your hand if you are a treaty person. And of course, all the native folks raised their hands, and not anything against the non-native folks who were there. Not many of them raised their hands, but then he had told the whole crowd that really we should all have our hands raised, because all of these treaties are the responsibility of all of us. Be you a representative within the United States government, be it state, federal, be you just a citizen. Treaty responsibilities are the responsibility of all of us who exist here on this land and within these two parties. And so I can totally say that I feel that this issue, the stamp site, and everything going on with GCEDC is a violation of the Canandaigua Treaty. That's how I feel. Because I don't feel how our free use and enjoyment is really being recognized here. If we're sitting here and telling them X, Y, and Z, these things are going to impact our people. These things are going to cause X, Y, and Z to hurt plants, animals, people. And they just don't falter. They don't stop and think. It's like talking to an empty chair. You know what I mean? And so I think that's all I have to say about that.
Do you want to add to that, Chris?
Sure. Yes, the Canandaigua Treaty, Article 7, says that we have the right to the free use and enjoyment of our land. And to respond to that, what's also included in the treaty is that either party, if they are harmed, they are able to express that harm or to make a complaint to the government. So if we did something wrong and somebody felt that we did harm to them as the non-native people, the other side of the treaty, that they can go to their government and tell them, to our government. And that is the same for us. So we took that in hand. We took that as being our way of that we are able to write to the President of the United States to say, we have a complaint and this is what's happening. We are not having the free use and enjoyment of our land when there is a threat to that land, to our land. We did a letter to the president to say that we oppose stamp and what the threat it is to us. We wrote a letter. We did not get a response. But the treaty brings in that federal relationship, that federal partnership with the federal agencies. Therefore, when we first had discussions with GCEDC, the Army Corps was there. And at that first meeting, when they told us about it, and they said, our council chiefs told them that, look, they had alternatives, and they said, we want you to look back at those alternatives. We don't want you next to our lands. So the Army Corps gave instructions, say, look at your alternatives and come back when you have done review and see where it ends up. Well, and of course, I ended up saying, that the stamp site was the best for being next to our territory there in the town of Alabama. So we got, our work cut out for us to really learn all what that was about. And with the 10 years or so of silence until a company did come forward in 2016, and they were chip manufacturing. That was the goal for stamp, was mainly chip manufacturing companies to come there. So we did have one, but unfortunately for us, they were dependent on a loan from the Department of Energy, which did not come through. Therefore, they couldn't develop there. So then come along Plug Power with their so-called green energy, and that also was a great fear of ours because of the threat of explosions. Mm-hmm. We understand that hydrogen production happens in some other countries, and so we looked into that, and we found that there were explosions there. So, of course, what would that mean for us? You see those two large globes? Those were the ones that was store the hydrogen. And if there was anything that happened there, it was going to be, I understand, maybe a 20, 23-mile radius that it would affect any kind of explosion. So, of course, that's coming into our territory. With a 400-foot buffer, it ain't going to stop at that 400-foot buffer. So anyway, our partnership, because of the treaty, is with the federal government. It's for the federal agencies. But since no federal agency had any jurisdiction on stamp, mainly the Army Corps of Engineers, because it was of some creeks go through the territory. We know there's wetlands there, but they came back to us and said that there was enough waters of the U.S. to have jurisdiction. So therefore, we had to work with all the state agencies. We came up with we didn't sign this, but the agencies involved was the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, DEC, Department of the Environmental Conservation, and GCEDC signed an LOR saying they will work on the state level and how it was going to work. And what we understood it for it to be is that they pay attention to us. GCEDC, we're there, even though we did not sign this, we did help, with the language so that we had some protection there, that we be involved, we be consulting, and that falls on DEC to do that.
And we're going to lose the hour in a second.
Okay.
Do you feel involved?
No, not as well as it should have been. And we know that there has been a lot of information denied us or hidden from us until it became a fact without our involvement.
Well, as we get ready to wrap this hour, Mark emailed to say Gino should file a FOIL, and on YouTube, Holly said, "Why the intense secrecy? Isn't GCEDC a government entity that is supposed to be accountable to the people?" Gino.
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah, simply yes. Yeah.
And Mark said, "File a FOIL."
Yes. We are doing stuff like that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Gino, for helping with not only your reporting, but helping steer this conversation. We look forward to more from you on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And our thanks to, from the Tonawanda Seneca Nation, Grandel Bird Logan, Chris Abrams. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
GCDC, open invitation to talk about this on Connections. More Connections coming up in a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.